Your new book makes a pretty bold assertion that I would like to get straight into around fat, and that being fat does not necessarily mean that you're metabolically unhealthy. That was scandalous when I read it. So how can that be true?
Now, listen, I'm going to throw myself under the bus here. When I was in medical school, I was given the same lecture about metabolism that pretty much you can look up on Wikipedia. You know, it's a blah, 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 chemical reactions. And everybody assumes that has these assumptions about body fat and metabolism, right? So you're born with a fast or slow metabolism. And if you're born with a slow metabolism, you're going to struggle with your food because you're going to actually gain a lot of body fat and struggle with your weight. That's what a lot of people feel. People always feel that like your metabolism is going to shoot up when you're a teenager. Eating 2 or 3 dinners, bouncing off the wall, full of energy, must be metabolism going up. And then, of course, the main thing is that people in their middle age, you know, like 30 is sort of like the last golden era of fitness. Once you get to 40, 45, 50, 55, menopause, you know, all that kind of stuff, your shape's going to change because your metabolism is going to slow down. You're going to gain body fat because of a slow metabolism. And so I always wanted to figure out, all right, why does all that happen? And is it actually true that we're born with different metabolisms and metabolism naturally slows as we get older?
And that being fat is bad for you. This is the part that I consider scandalous.
Well, here's the thing. Being fat is a subjective statement. What I would actually say that my book addresses is that body fat isn't harmful at a normal level. Fat is actually good. The big discovery is that fat is an actual organ in your body that forms when you're in the womb. And in fact, if you didn't have body fat, you wouldn't have a metabolism. You need body fat. It creates hormones that fuel your metabolism. It sounds kind of weird, like it would be the opposite. But in fact, if you didn't have body fat, you wouldn't have any energy. All right. It's only when you have too much body fat that basically the entire system goes into chaos. All right. Too much body fat, a little bit of body fat is like air traffic control running the way it is, landing planes, taking them off the runway. Too much body fat is basically like putting a rock and roll band into air traffic control tower, all right, and playing as loud as they can and having the crowds rush in. And now the air traffic controllers are distracted, don't know what to do, and extra body fat derails your metabolism. So it's not a slow metabolism that causes you to gain body fat and gain weight. It's the other way around. Extra body fat slows your metabolism. So it's not quite right that being fat is good. Having fat is good. Having too much fat is bad.
Let me ask a really pointed question that I took away from your book that you're going to say yes to this, but maybe not. In the book, the paraphrase that I wrote down was being big isn't necessarily bad. And so what I want to know is, can you be clinically obese and be healthy? Like, could you, when you look at somebody, I'll say it from my perspective, when I look at somebody who's clinically obese, with love in my heart, I just think they're killing themselves. And just by seeing that they're obese, I know they're unhealthy. But when I was reading your book, it made it sound like I can't make that assumption. They may be, because it certainly isn't automatic that having that kind of body fat is good, but it may not be as automatic as I thought that kind of body fat is bad.
Great point to discuss. So body size is different than body fat and obesity. So people are big. They can have big body size. I mean, think about a heavyweight boxer or an Olympian who actually, is a weightlifter. Those are big people.
Let's go to the example you give in the book, which is a sumo wrestler.
Exactly. I was going to bring that up.
So I look at a sumo wrestler and I just assume they die young. 100%, no ifs, ands, or buts, they are going to die young.
The amazing thing is that they are actually at a peak of fitness when they're actually training, and they're overloading their bodies, and to develop that shape, they're very strong. They're metabolically stable. They don't actually have problems with glucose regulation.
What does metabolically stable mean?
It means that they are able to process their food without having huge insulin spikes. It means that they have normal levels of energy. Their inflammation levels are not through the roof, which, by the way, is a matter of training, sleep, discipline, food. Their diet is very specific as well. But the point is that if a sumo wrestler isn't tragically ill for the period of their career, we do need to rethink just because you're big doesn't mean that you're sick. Now, chronic obesity coupled with poor diet, coupled with that leads to inflammation, coupled with poor sleep, coupled with stress, coupled with lack of physical activity. Okay, that it's sort of that's the train wreck that actually begins to happen.
What do we know about longevity of sumo wrestlers? Do they, because like you'll often hear the statement, and I haven't looked closely enough at the data to know if this is true, but it seems intuitively true, that you don't get heavy set centenarians. Like people that make it to that age, they're all going to be thin.
I don't think that's necessarily true. It's what we would imagine to be true. I think people can be portly, they could be middling.
But is there
in
any
size.
data on this?
I don't know of any data that takes a look at, I mean, look, I think that what you're trying to get at is there evidence that obesity actually is not harmful but helpful perhaps, and that you could have better longevity by carrying on excess body fat? And the answer is no.
Yeah, I'm going to say your book paints a far more nuanced picture.
Yeah.
And so the nitty gritty that I want to get into is around that. So the case that I'm trying to build to see if I can get myself on board with this idea, because reading that, and I happen to be researching two people right now that are both making a very similar claim in their books. And so literally in the last 48 hours, I feel like I've had my world upended, and it's like, oh, the earth is round. It's not flat. What? And so I feel on unshaky ground. So here's how I read your book.
Okay.
There is a sweet spot. You can be too fat and you can not have enough fat. But there are 2 times in the book where you say that actually being skinny is the more dangerous thing. And so you said you're far more likely to die of all-cause mortality if you're underweight than if you're overweight. So that was startling statistic number 1. Yep. And then the other one was that if you have lean diabetes, which I'd never even heard that phrase before, but I get it, what I used to call skinny fat. Mm-hmm. So if you have lean diabetes, you have the blood markers, like if I was looking at your blood panel, because metabolically you're just a mess, I would assume that you were obese, but in reality you're not. That's more dangerous. 2.5 times you're more likely to die. I don't know. I can't remember if it was all-cause mortality or heart disease or whatever, but you were 2.5 times more likely to something terrible if you were lean diabetes than if you were obese and had diabetes. So I was like, whoa, this really does feel like the table's been upended. Yeah.
So let's kind of do a reset to say, what does body fat actually do? Okay. And I, so as I was writing this book, because I'm very curious about where things come from. Where does fat come from? Fat isn't, we associate fat as adults as, something we see in the mirror and we step out of the shower and we might not like what we're seeing, or step on a scale and you look at a number, it's not what you're expecting and you kind of curse it, right? Or you walk to the grocery store and you walk by the butcher section, the meat section, you see a nice steak with a big rind of fat on it. You go, ugh, like we're as a society, I think that we have some repulsion to the idea of seeing anything that's associated with fat. Mm. But it turns out that it's not always true. When we look at babies, when babies make us smile, they're pudgy, they're fat, big pot bellies, big fat cheeks, our arms and legs are like balloons twisted together, like in a carnival.
It's cute on the baby. It was not cute. Like if I rolled out of the shower looking like twisted balloons, I would not be impressed.
That's true. But on the other hand, if you had a baby that had chiseled cheekbones, long thin arms, long thin thighs, like a runway model, that would also not be cool. You would think that baby is sick, and indeed it would be. And so the real question that I started asking is, what is the developmental role and what is the adult role of body fat? When does it start and what does it do over the course of our lifetime? Because you talk about longevity. So what does actually this thing called fat actually do? When does it start and where does it go? So here's actually the interesting thing. Body fat starts in the womb at about 8 weeks after your mom's egg met your dad's sperm. And the first tissue that gets laid down are blood vessels, because every organ needs a circulation. Then the next tissue are nerves, because you need instructions to be able to operate your organs, and the nerves can convey those instructions. Another tissue that forms right after that is fat. Fat, the cells that comprise fat are called adipocytes. okay, adipose tissue, adipocytes, and the way that they form looks like bubble wrap. You know the bubble wrap you use for packing, right? The small bubble wrap. And what they do, it's like they bubble wrap around blood vessels. And you go like, okay, so they're not forming like in the waist or the butt right away. Why do they form around blood vessels? Well, it turns out this has to do with a later fate of what the fat cells actually do for you. Fat cells, one of the functions that they do, they're padding. Okay, so good thing we have fat to pad us. If we didn't have any body fat, we slipped on the rug, fell on the ground, our organs might rupture. All right, so padding is good. Number two, fat, and this has to do with the blood vessels. Fat cells are fuel tanks for our energy. All right, so our metabolism relies on fuel tanks, just like your car relies on some kind of either a battery or a fuel tank. And when your fuel runs low, you got to actually go to the filling station or the charging station to tank up, fill up on your fuel for your car. Similarly, when our fuel tanks run low in our body under healthy conditions, okay, we have to go pull over to the filling station, what happens to be a dinner table, a refrigerator, a pantry, a restaurant, to be able to fill up on our energy, which comes from our food, and our metabolism uses all the energy it needs to kind of run its operating system. So blinking, heart beating, walking around, but anything extra gets stored in those adipocytes into our fat. Now, why are they near blood vessels? Because when you swallow food, you digest it from your stomach, it gets absorbed, or your small intestines gets absorbed into your bloodstream. And guess where the energy needs to get stored? Right in the fuel tank, right out of the blood vessels. So from a time we're babies, before we're born, that's where the fuel tanks are. All right. And that's one of the things that it does. Padding, fuel tank. The third thing that fat does for normal, healthy function, for metabolism, for health, is it actually is an endocrine organ. So our fat releases hormones, normal, healthy hormones for our metabolism. At least 15 hormones have been identified from fat that fat makes almost exclusively. And 3 of them are critical for having normal energy, normal metabolism. Our fat controls normal metabolism in healthy people.
If you like that clip, check out another powerful clip right here, and I'll see you there.